Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Beyond the Hype, AI Power Strategies for Retail Success in 2025, sponsored by Fabric. My name is Dan Berthume. I am Senior Technology Editor of Chain Store Age, and I will be your moderator today. With NRF 2025 just around the corner, this is your chance to gain practical strategies to transform your retail operations and stay ahead of the curve. This webinar will equip you with the tools you need to navigate AI's transformative potential, from omnichannel excellence to supply chain resilience and post-purchase innovation. We'll get started in a few moments. While we wait for some more people to join, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. We try to make these webinars as interactive as possible, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the hour. You will find that on the left side of your screen, down below the presenter headshots. Our sponsor will follow up on any questions we don't have time to answer during the webinar by email after the session concludes. You can also use this section down here on the left if you have any technical questions about the webinar itself, and you will get a direct reply from a very capable webinar producer. We also encourage you to provide any other feedback that you may have using this feature. Okay, that does it for housekeeping. Let's get on with the webinar. We have a comprehensive conversation with expert speakers from Fabric and RSR Research today, ready to engage in an insightful conversation about key developments shaping retail and AI adoption in 2025. Let's meet our speakers. Jay Topper is Chief Customer Officer at Fabric Inc., a leading modular and API-first e-commerce and omni-channel order management system platform company. Before this role, Jay served as Chief Digital Officer at Chico's FAS, where he led the company's digital-first strategy, overseeing technology, customer service, and global supply chain operations. Before Chico's, Jay was Chief Digital Officer at FTD, and his previous experience includes leadership roles at Vitacost, Kroger, and Rosetta Stone. Jay holds a master's degree in telecommunications and computing management from NYU and a bachelor's degree in mathematical sciences from the United States Coast Guard Academy. He is also a former commissioned officer of the U.S. Coast Guard and served in the U.S. Army. Steve Rowan is a managing partner at Retail Systems Research, an industry market intelligence firm that helps retailers make more strategic decisions about the role of information technology in their enterprise. He focuses on areas of emerging impact on retail and is widely regarded as one of the most informed and objective voices in the industry today. Steve began his career in retail, entering the tech space as a project manager at a software development company during the dot-com era. After a number of years working as a retail-specific journalist, he made the transition to retail industry analyst in 2006 and co-founded RSR in 2007. And now I'll kick off the conversation with a question I will first ask of Jay Topper. Jay, where do you see AI making the greatest inroads and impact for retailers in 2025, specifically around AI within commerce platforms?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And also, Steve, welcome. Good to spend some more time with you. This will be fun. In the last year, I've become an advocate of in-application AI, and I'll explain that just super briefly and then turn it over to Steve. If you just wind the clock back a little bit, as a career CIO and CTO in retail, there's a ton of data in a lot of different places, and there's a lot of management reporting platforms that sit on top of that. You have CDPs, you have big, huge platforms like Tableau, you have web analytics, you have supply chain analytics, you have financial analytics, you have all this information. And typically, when you manage a commerce platform, you're looking at some reports, looking at some data, and then in some way, shape, or form manipulating the platform, and maybe even having your technology group manipulate the platform. I think the thing I'm excited about in 2025 is putting this data and analytics that are relevant to a platform inside the platform, so the users that are operating things, whether it's a CMS or an OMS or a product catalog, a PIM, customer service, whatever applications that are serving your commerce ecosystem, pulling in the relevant data that you have and some macro data from outside your organization inside that application and start to make recommendations and predictions for the users of that application so they can make on the spot changes around the where that information may be pointing them, instead of, so things that could take days and sometimes even weeks could actually take minutes. And I think the smarter these things get, the faster the retailers can respond to their consumers' behavior. So I'm a big fan of that, and I think we're going to see more and more of it in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be a pivotal year, one way or another, right? So just to go in the Wayback Machine here for a minute, we're on the eve of going to NRF, right? The NRF Big Show, we'll all be there in a week. And one of the things, I've been going to that show since 2003, I think, maybe missing one in there at one point. One of the things that we find that sort of is a trend from year to year with the NRF show is some years are really whiz-bangery kind of shows. You know, there's a lot of flash, there's a lot of pop, here's what's possible. And other years are much more pragmatic. And for the last few years, what we've really seen surrounding the AI component is a lot of here's what's possible. Here's the bright, shiny object, as my partner Paula Rosenblum likes to call it. Let's all focus on this and get really excited about the hype and the buzz. What I'm hoping to see this year, and what, you know, we conduct anywhere between 10 to 12 benchmark reports with retailers a year. So I have my finger a little bit on the pulse of what I kind of expect to see. We want to see a lot more pragmatic application of things in exactly the areas Jay was talking about. Order management, merchandise planning, forecasting, and simulation. These are areas where AI holds tremendous power. They're not always the sexiest thing. They're not always the thing that, you know, is customer facing, and so therefore it gets a lot of press. But they're the areas where, and Jay couldn't have said it better, you have people that are, you know, working fairly tedious jobs, doing really important work that takes an enormous amount of time. You add in some kind of co-pilot, you add in some kind of guide there to help them with an AI asset behind it. And all of a sudden, those things shrink from weeks to minutes to seconds, however long it might be. So our anticipation and our real, you know, I guess I want to say what I hope to see in about a week's time is a lot more practical applications. Let's skim away some of the sexy and get much more towards what's really happening to make people more efficient at the end of the day.
I love it. I agree 100%.
Okay, those are two really good answers. Steve, we'll stay with you to kick off the second question, which is, when looking to AI to help solve business problems, where does a retailer's data strategy come into play?
Oh, that's a big question. That's a really big question. So I'm not going to pitch for my company, I promise, but we do conduct retail-specific benchmarks by topic every year. We've been doing it since 2007. And when we used to ask, we follow a methodology every time, whether we're talking about store, whether we're talking about e-commerce, whether we're talking about merchandise planning, we're always in this framework we call the boot. And perhaps the most interesting part of the boot, B as business challenges, O as opportunities, is the second L, which is the organizational inhibitors, the things that stand in the way of progress. And when we first started this company back in 2007, regardless of the topic we were studying, whether it was store or supply chain or loss prevention, when we asked people, what is the thing internally that stands in your way between you doing all the wonderful things that you say you want to do to improve your enterprise in this area? What's the thing that stands in the way? They would always say, the vendor community needs to show me that there's real ROI here. And it was always this sort of scapegoat excuse of we would push it back on the community and say, I need to see, you know, that there's real technological advances that are worth my time. If I'm going to stick my neck out for an initiative, it really needs to pay for itself in a very short period of time. Since the early days of 2007, the thing that was in the background, the dirty data asset that was within retailers, the fact they couldn't trust the data that they were operating on, has steadily climbed to the top. And in the last 3 years, it has become the pervasive roadblock to why retailers can't realize all these wonderful things that they want to realize. The best of them, what we call retail winners, they're fairly quick to admit that they've allowed themselves in a lot of ways to get into a hole. You know, pre-COVID, it was pretty easy to push a lot of these initiatives down the road and say, well, we'll get to that someday. We'll get to that someday. We'd love to do buy online, pick up in store someday. We'd love to do, you know, XYZ, whatever the initiative was at hand. And what happened during COVID that we can all agree is a lot of these things that would have been nice to have became immediate. Retailers needed to put together solutions that would help people shop the way they want to shop, where they want to shop, how they want to shop, when they want to shop. And a lot of them had to be put together in ways that were a little less than elegant. What they've found on the backside of that is that all of the information required to make these things work properly, whether we're talking about forecast planning, whether we're talking about promotions that you're running to customers, they all rely on data. And if you cannot trust that data, you get stuck in the mud pretty quickly. You start making really bad decisions at scale, quickly. And that's a really bad situation to be in. So it's a little bit long-winded, but the short answer to your question, Dan, is it's the next big thing. Dealing with data integrity, data purity, and the ability to trust what you have to make informed decisions, especially when you add AI to this, and it starts making those next best actions much quicker. If you feed bad information into that, you're going to get some really bad decisions that have widespread repercussions all the way across the enterprise. So part of the work that we're doing with our retail clients right now is helping them to guarantee that they can rely on the information that they have. Sometimes they have to bring in outside experts to do that, and it's slow going, and the word tedium comes into play there as well. But once they've sort of turned that corner, it's remarkable how many doors open up to them when they know they can trust their customer information, their inventory accuracy, their supply chain information they're getting from their partners. Those things are the lifeblood of the organization. And until they're reliable, it's really hard to make meaningful change.
Okay. And Jay, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, and full transparency, we've looked at the questions that we're going to be speaking to today, but we did not practice these questions. We kind of settled on them within the last week, but I can tell Steve and I could have many conversations and have a lot of alignment here. I'm going to approach it a little bit from the technical side without being technical. Is, as a lifelong CIO and CTO, you're usually in charge of the data, and you have the organization of the data, you have the security of data, you have the reliability and the accuracy of data, that trust component that Steve talked about, and then you have the accessibility of the data, of how fast you can actually get to it. And the bottom line is, if you, as a company, and this is even before AI, when you're putting in new platforms, composable platforms, headless platforms, that was probably 3 or 4 years ago, the hot topic at NRF. The more accessible and reliable and organized your data is, the faster you can innovate. And if I were walking into a company tomorrow, the first thing I would do is take on the data. It almost has to be day one. You have to have a parallel process to get that data strategy, that data governance, that data accuracy and reliability and accessibility in order, no matter what you're trying to do. Because if you can make progress there, and it doesn't have to be perfection, but if you can make incremental progress there, then the speed to be able to access that data, not just for reporting, but for bending the consumer experiences around some of these things that we're talking about around AI, you can do implementations in weeks and months, instead of the old days where it's 9 months, 12 months, 2 years in some cases to put in some of these big platforms. If you can get that data organized first and put attention there, then you can now start to speed to innovate a lot faster. So I'm a big fan of having that as a work stream, a continual work stream inside of a company, regardless of what platforms and solutions you're trying to put into your company.
Yeah, and I think you said a mouthful there, Jay, and obviously you and I could riff on this for a long time. I think we probably will find a way to get together in New York and have a drink and talk about some of this stuff. But the incremental change part, that can't be overstated enough. When we survey retailers and they tell us what are the challenges that are keeping them up at night, one of the hallmarks of a winning behavior, what the best retailers are doing, and what we all hope to that they can lead by example, is they tackle these things in bite-sized pieces with realistic expectations. They don't view AI as this magic bullet. We flip a switch and all of a sudden all that ails us is gone. To the contrary, they're looking at these things. I mean, we have data we could share ad nauseum about stats about who's looking at what and what they're looking at it for. But the gist of it is, the bigger and the smarter and the more performative a retailer is, the more they're looking at AI in these tiny little incremental pieces. Where can this help here? Where can this help there? Not as some sort of cure-all. That tends to be much more of what we call a lagging behavior, or a lagger's way of looking at the world. Is there's something magical going to come down and it's going to save my business from all the bad decisions that we've been making for a long time. And unfortunately, I think we all know here on this call that just never proves to be the case.
No, you're exactly right. It's incremental, and it gets back to your very first comment you were talking about about sorting through what's real and big bangs and omnipresent enterprise AI solutions. I don't think that's what we're going to see in 2025. It's these point solutions within very specific problems you're trying to solve, and get that right first. And again, continually work on that data structure and strategy, while you're doing these things, and you can end up in a really, really good place within 12 months if you have that right focus.
100%.
Okay, so that was a very good discussion there. We're now going to move to Jay. I'll let you take this one first. How can AI directly and specifically elevate customer experiences within the omnichannel consumer journey, and what are the key metrics impacted?
Yeah, so I'm gonna give 3 quick examples here, and a couple of them are overlapping into our product offering, which is AI Order Cloud, as you mentioned at the top of the hour, and one that's not directly part of our offering, but one I believe in. So I'm very focused. Again, what we've talked about is the concept of personalization and using your CDP and marketing. That's been spoken about ad nauseum. I'm definitely into this operational excellence component about being super efficient in organization with your inventory, with your processes. One of my favorite places is around planning and allocation, and that is if you can buy the right amount of product and then put it in the right place, so you have the right product, the right SKU down to the size and color at the right place at the right time at the point of intent. That is a holy grail for every retailer I've ever worked for. And if I walked into a company tomorrow, that's probably one of the first places I would look, because these allocation and planning, no matter what systems you're using, are often on unwieldy spreadsheets. And AI is really making a dent in this concept to get smarter and smarter of how many size 12 blue girlfriend jeans I should buy, and what stores should I place how many, and how many should I put in my distribution center. Getting down even into more of a macro or micro level, a couple of examples within our product suite is within that real-time inventory. When you have an OMS that looks at real-time inventory, whether it's from a marketing channel, because marketing channels are becoming selling channels. So you think of TikTok, you think of email, you think of Facebook, where you're actually not in all cases going into the website or into the store to buy. You're actually buying it at that point of intent when you're seeing a marketing message. You need to understand your inventory availability, where that inventory is, and can it meet the needs of the customer. And then in some cases, you need to rebalance that inventory based on the micro and macro data points that you have as more and more customers are coming through these marketing and selling channels. So within our OMS, and we're not the only ones that are attacking this, but we're certainly one of the leaders in this space, is the ability to actually put AI on top of your real-time inventory to start to give intelligence about how you can reposition that. Because if you don't have inventory at the right place and the right time, you're not only missing sales, but however you're measuring NPS or customer experience is dropping. And then another example is within product catalog, the descriptions, and everyone knows how complex the SEO algorithms are within Google, and they're continually changing, and nobody knows what's in the black box. But you can start to have AI impact your product descriptions based on what property and where you're placing those descriptions in those marketing and selling channels, where the AI can start to make suggestions to how you should construct the descriptions of those products. And you can continually evolve your product descriptions to have more and more impact on SEO. Everybody knows SEO is like a free channel. And the more people you can get to buy through SEO, it's a heck of a lot more expensive than or cheaper than SEM. So those are 2 examples, intelligent AI-based SEM improvements and intelligent-based real-time inventory and rebalancing inventory within a retailer. That was a mouthful, Steve. And you didn't know I was
you said some cool stuff in there. I mean, from our perspective, there's a lot of ways I could take that, but one of the things that we started doing probably about 3-4 years ago is we started surveying not just retailers, but also consumers, to sort of get this sort of his and hers version of what's going on. Retailers, what do you think about your stores? Oh, we think they're great. We think customers love them. Customers, what do you think of stores? Well, I can never find anybody to help me when I really want to, and they never have the inventory that I want. And so we've identified a lot of these gaps that you might expect. But one of the things that we've found that was, I think, surprising for us in the identification of these gaps is how upset customers get when inventory is not where it should be when it should be, when sizing is not the way that it was expected. I mean, we're talking about something that might have been a mild annoyance 5-10 years ago can now be a deal breaker for a brand. It really can. Customers are losing patience quickly. Mobility isn't just making us smarter and more informed. It's also making us all have slightly shorter fuses when it comes to shopping because, and this is not something I'm just saying from an anecdotal point of view. We have a lot of numbers to put behind this. Customers do not have a lot of apathy for retailers when they don't get it right. So everything Jay is talking about, these opportunities to know where your inventory is, these things are not nice to haves anymore. They're table stakes. If you want to be able to continue to compete in the world of channel killers, if you want to be able to compete against the Amazons and the big boys of the world, you have to make sure that you're offering something that is consistent to people so they don't just write you off. And AI holds a lot of promise there. But again, there's so many more fundamentals. There's so many more retail 101 things that need to happen before that. So for us, what AI really does is it opens up a chance to have a conversation with a retailer about their processes, about their systems and their operations, about their data, about what it is they want to be when they grow up, before we sort of shift the conversation to, okay, now how can AI be leveraged as a tool? Because at the end of the day, it's just a series of mathematical tools to help you achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the first place. So for us, those conversations are getting more focused as time goes on, and sort of that whiz-bangery has worn off. And retailers are getting a lot more pragmatic about what it is they want to solve, whether it's with pricing or whether it's with their merchandise. Maybe it's a fashion retailer and they're really worried about what they're going to do next season. Those become very practical and quite frankly, much more productive conversations to have about, okay, now how do we layer AI onto that? So I couldn't agree with Jay more. It's an incremental approach. It's a layered approach. But at the end of the day, we're just adding speed to something that already needs to be really fundamentally sound before we add speed to it.
Yep. Agreed.
Okay. So Steve, maybe you could use some of your client experiences, building on that last question. What are some of the best retailer uses of AI that you've seen to date?
Oh yeah. Well, that's kind of the question, right? Because a lot of it isn't the attention grabbing stuff that you would expect, right? I mean, I know that Under Armour has done, and Victoria's Secret have done some things with their dressing rooms where they're folded in, not the smart mirror, the dreaded smart mirror that we heard a lot about, that nobody was really all that excited about in the first place, but ways to put when you're in a fitting room, ways to use a combination of RFID to determine the tags that are on the clothing that you have and combine with AI and determine where or not, how it would look on you in a different size, different color. We've seen some really cool things like that are customer facing, and those get a lot of attention. But for me, the bigger question is what's being used behind the scenes, right? And those are the things that people like to stay really quiet about. I mean, I think probably the best known example here is, Nike liked the AI company they were using to help with their forecasting, that they just bought the company so that nobody else could use it, right? So there's not a lot of high profile, I would say, AI cases that are anything other than window dressing. Apart from the practical applications in store, those are cool. But for us, the bigger issue is what's being done behind scenes. And that really comes down to, again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but category management, pricing, forecasting, and planning. Those are the areas where retailers tell us they have the most interest going forward, particularly the best retailers. They want to leverage these tools to make sure that they're not making bad mistakes quickly.
Okay. And Jay, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record too. I mean, I was taught early on in my business career coming out of the military that it's really simple. Traffic times conversion times AOV equals revenue, and everything else comes up underneath those things. There's no other variable and everything contributes there. And then I marry that over to the concept of supply, demand, and fulfill. And when you marry those two things together and you take those metrics, traffic, conversion, AOV, and you layer those over supply, demand, and fulfill, it's going to get back to, at the supply side, buy the right amount, put it in the right place. At the demand side, Make sure that when the customer has intent to buy, that product and that ability to buy is at that moment. And then to fulfill, which you haven't really talked about quite as much, is a customer has expectations, pick up in store or ship to me, that look at the algorithms that can create the best mode to fulfill that product to satisfy what the customer expectations are at the best margin for the company, for the retailer itself. I'll give one example. A killer to gross margin is split shipments. When you have to ship 2 boxes from 2 different places, like your DC can only ship 1, and you either have to ship 1 from a second DC where the customer is getting 2 packages, or worse, you have to ship 1 from a store. You've got double the shipping, you've got double the labor, you've got double the packaging. It's a substandard customer experience, and you're losing, maybe $10 or $12 of margin on that split shipment. So if you can get that inventory in the right place, and you can have algorithms that help you looking at inventory, looking at labor, looking at weather, for crying out loud, and intelligently figure out how best to route that product, you're going to not only make the customer happy and they're going to circle back around and buy again, but you're also going to improve your gross margins. And $10 or $12 on $150 AOV is an incredible amount of profit that you're throwing out the door without getting something like that right.
Okay, so Jay, we'll stay with you. You just talked about getting it right. If you had one tip or trick to suggest to retailers to cut through the hype of AI and find solutions that truly solve or prioritize business problems, what would it be?
Yeah, and this is, again, I'm going to put my CIO and CTO hat on here. I have a non-CIO and CTO hat too, but there are a lot of shiny objects out there. I've seen demos. I've put in 100 platforms in my career. I actually counted them. It's nearly 100. Wow. And I probably had to look at 500 to get to that 100. And sure. A demo where you see UX and you see something that's really beautiful put in front of somebody is sometimes ends up leading the way of choosing a product. And I encourage everyone to actually get into the technology of what's going on behind the scenes. Have your engineers talk to their engineers. Have your product management team talk to their product management team. As if you were building it yourself, you need to be comfortable in the way they're managing the data, the way their algorithms are built, how much of it really is machine learning versus some sort of human intervention or trick behind the scenes. Because I'm putting my retail hat on here. I'm not trying to criticize any platform provider in the world. But in my experience, up until this role 6 months ago, 75%, more than half, is not as technologically advanced as you think it is when you start to get under the covers. And maybe that's okay if you can trust the roadmap of the platform provider to incrementally get there. In other words, you're plugging in at the right time and there's some sort of co-innovation going on. But to me, I would rather have superior technology with a substandard UX. Work on the UX is relatively simple than have a beautiful UX that makes everybody happy inside the org, but the technology is not there and maybe not going to get there. So dig into the tech and have if tech isn't involved in the process, get them involved and get them to dig into the technology.
That's really sound advice. That's going to help people avoid making some really bad, glossy decisions.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, no, it's sound. It's super sound. I mean, it sounds like something that would, we wrap up our reports with baseline recommendations, and that sounds like a really solid recommendation, which is do not be fooled by the glitz. You got to get into this and make sure that the tech is exactly where you need it to be and a fit for your company, for the tech that you can bring on. Because one of the things we see over and over again when we ask retailers, what are the things that are keeping you from moving forward? You move 2 or 3 dots down the line there in a chart, and you find we don't have data scientists on board. We don't know if this stuff works the way that we need it to, right? We have no real way to verify this, and we don't have the money to start hiring new people to do that. So it's super solid advice.
We talk about data as one of the, foundations that you have to get right. The 2 I put into that category, one is data. The other is culture, that you have to have a culture that embraces this type of change, and you have to have some self-awareness as a technology department, how much skills you have and how much you can actually marry up with that company personally, where you believe in them as humans, as if they were part of your company. With all the tech swirling around now and all the AI and all the skills that are out there that a lot of companies don't have, you have to have trust. And to develop that trust, it's personal. It's not just believing in an individual, what they say. You actually want to form a certain bond, again, as if they were part of your own company. So I think culture and data are kind of can be real blockers if you don't get those two things right.
I don't want to get too touchy-feely here, but it's why we don't play matchmaker, right? There are other firms out there that'll absolutely play, okay, retailer X, you should be looking at this. We don't do that because the truth is sometimes the fit really is about. I mean, we've had a lot of retail clients who come to us, hey, we bought what we thought was the greatest solution 3 years ago. It's just not working for us.
Yep.
Now we gotta unwind everything that we just wound up and start all over again. So again, couldn't agree with you more. Church to the choir.
And sometimes I've come across people that outsource their decision making on a platform selection. I think it's good to have help, and I think if you have a trusted consultant partner SI with you, to have contributions from them is critical. But at the end of the day, it's your decision, and you need to make the decision and get comfortable yourself. So I agree. I like to make sure that the risks I'm taking are ones that me and the staff that I manage are embracing fully.
Yeah, it's one of the things CIOs have told us. If they're going to stick their neck out at this point and risk their reputation and most likely their career on these decisions, they need to be a lot more certain about the efficacy of those decisions in advance now than they were even just a short time ago. I mean, the stakes are pretty high. The world's moving quickly enough, and Amazon just keeps marching along and eating everybody's lunch. There's really no room to make a critical mistake like that at this point in haste.
Our most recent customer, which I think I'm allowed to name, but I'm not going to name. But I think I am allowed because we did a press release on them. But I'm not kidding. I bet you we had 1,000 people hours of due diligence around the technology of our product between their people and our people, and all in a selling cycle that was about 60 days, day after day after day digging. And you know what? Everyone has to be pretty much honest, because if you ask 5-level questions down, there's nowhere to hide. And we welcome that scrutiny. And in fact, if you're a retailer, I would encourage you to get to the level of scrutiny you can until you have that confidence.
Okay, so actually, Steve, do you have beyond that great discussion we just had, is there any one additional tip or trick you might suggest?
I don't know about tips or tricks, but I do know that, and I'm going to sort of, end where I started here around the hype cycle and the buzz curve. One of the things that we've been trying to hammer home, we're asking retailers continually, again, whatever topic that we're studying, whether it's the store report, which we are just about to launch, or whether it's the supply chain report that comes after that, we're asking them about AI within the construct of that topic. 5 years ago, we had an AI specific report. Those days are gone, right? It's just part and parcel to every one of these functions across the enterprise. So one of the things that we keep asking is about, where are you in your pilots? What are you hoping to get from these? And where do you think you're going to be 3 years from now? Which is the only time that we'll ever really ask forward-looking questions, is about, what do you think this technology means to you 3 years from now? And the short version of a year's worth of research across a number of different topics summed up there is, retailers are piloting with AI pretty small, 30% maybe at best are piloting something. Whereas when you flip those numbers and you ask about, what do you think this is going to mean for your business, you get closer to 90% say it's going to be transformative in 3 years' time. So we're clearly knocking on the door of a transformative technology. We all know it. It doesn't stop at retail. It goes into healthcare. It goes into financial. It goes everywhere, right? But one of the things that we keep sort of bringing home to the technology community, and it's a conversation I anticipate I'll have a lot next week in New York, is from the vendor community, it's not always the greatest idea to oversell the AI component. It's just a tool. And retailers have been so burned by so many of these, next big things, whether it was IoT or CRM or whatever came along that became the hype cycle that year, or those 2 years or those 3 years. It's created this sense of almost skepticism is healthy, but there's almost a jaded nature among a lot of retailers that we talk to. I'm not going to fall for this again. And that's a mistake. Not falling for this is a real mistake, because this isn't something to fall for. This is a transformative moment in history. And for people who sort of, bury their heads in the sand and say, well, I'll get to it next year, that's a bad decision. This is the kind of thing, again, I don't want to sound too repetitive, but it moves quickly. The world is moving faster. And if you get left behind here, it might be a brand killing mistake. So we're not trying to sow the seeds of fear and uncertainty and doubt, but we are trying to drive home how serious of a game-changing moment this is. And so our real bit of advice is, if you've been turned off by the noise of it all, tune back in, find people that will help you filter through that noise and get to the real message, because there's a really powerful message underneath all of it. Yeah, there is a ton of noise, and we're all going to see a bunch of it at the Javits Center in just about a week's time. But there's some real gems in there. There's some real power, and there's some real powerful solutions that are available today. We keep warning vendors not to get too far out over their skis, even though if you're a skier, you can't really get too far out over your skis, but it's a phrase everybody loves. But not to be too far ahead, because retailers, they're in a tough spot. They're being asked to do a lot with a little, and they have a long and difficult road in front of them if they're going to return to relevance when there's so many, let's name it as it is. When Amazon is doing it so well. So for us, it's sort of it's a double-edged, tip is for vendors, lean into the value more so than the AI sparkliness of it. Get to the AI and the tech as Jay's talking about, but lean into the real business value and what business solutions you're going to solve for. But for retailers, do not turn a deaf ear to this. It's the wrong time to do that.
You said so much there. My gosh, I'm going to send you an email off to the side so we can make sure we spend time at NRF together. Two things jumped in my mind. One is, if you have that good data structure or good architecture or understand it, anytime you put something in, have an out, fail fast. I know that's so cheesy and everybody talks about failing fast.
Yeah, but
at the end of the day, you can't go fast if you can't fail fast. And a lot of retailers that came up through the brick and mortar ecosystem, they're a little more conservative than some, and I understand and appreciate that. So the more you get that data in your architecture where you can nimbly put something in, make sure you have an out to nimbly take something out if you've gone down the wrong road. I think pilots are going to be a thing of the future where, hey, put this search engine on top and I'll try it for 60 days and see if you're better. And if you're not, I'm not going to go with you. More and more of that type of trial and error, I think, is going to be possible. But you have to have the architecture and the kind of the guts to take those chances to try little things. Because if you get 50% of those small things right, that's not terrible. As long as you're not overpaying and spending too much time on the ones that you didn't do right. It's okay to test and learn. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Couldn't agree more.
How'd we do, Dan?
You did well. And we have some audience questions. Now's the time to get into those. And also, if you have a question you have not yet asked, please feel free to do so.
I like those fiery panels where people start yelling at each other and saying, "You're wrong. No, you're wrong." And we didn't really do that. So.
I do a podcast called Chiefly Digital. That's a shameless plug. It's not about fabric. It's all about digital. And I'm looking to get somebody to come on, an executive in the digital world to come on that I can argue with, because I don't like it where we're just always in sync. I actually want to go.
It makes it entertaining, and you're in the podcast business, man. You're an entertainer. You got to bring somebody in there. That's a flat
I want some controversy in there for sure.
Yeah.
Right, the ESPN around the horn model. Just get all the sports writers to disagree.
Not that
That's right.
Okay, so our first audience question, and whichever one of you wants to jump in first. Where do you recommend a retailer looking to launch an AI program start?
Well, I mean, I'll take it, and it won't be the most definitive answer, but I would say that it's a great question, but there's some detail missing in are you just looking to implement AI for AI's sake, or is there a business problem that you're trying to solve for? And so, to me, those become almost two different questions. Identifying what it is that you're trying to solve for and then figuring out how AI can help is the path that we recommend retailers take, rather than, just doing something for the sake of saying, okay, we've ticked the AI box. Now, that being said, for a lot of folks, we had a conversation with a retailer rep in Canada last week that they are dealing with levels of distributed geography and transportation that I can't even fathom that they've been able to do for as long as they've been able to do it, for as well as they've been able to do it. And for them, it really is, could AI help this? Could it help our business? So for someone like that, I think the best thing that you can do is, attend as many smart people sessions at NRF as you can to hear what's going on, what the status of the technology looks like, particularly as it relates to whatever area of the business you're trying to address is. And it's kind of a vague answer, but we tell people, you got to experiment, you got to dip your toe in, but do it as wisely as you possibly can to solve for a problem that your gut tells you exists, rather than just go chasing whatever the vendor community is saying is the next greatest thing since sliced bread.
I think Steve and I would both. I don't want to speak for him, so he has to nod it, but he'll probably have to nod his head after I say this. I'm happy to speak to anybody, and it doesn't have to be about Fabric's suite of products. It just, I'm a 27-year CIO and CTO. You want to get a perspective one-on-one. I don't care who you are or what company you work for. I'm more than happy to do that. But I really like something Steve said, is a company has a strategy they're trying to achieve. They have blockers to that strategy, whatever it is. Some of it's technology, some of it's not. And it could be design of product. There's all kinds of things that have to feed into that. And the problems you're trying to solve to realize that strategy, focus your efforts on those particular areas, because anything outside of those areas is a distraction. It's not just important what you do, it's important what you don't do. So you have to really segregate the noise. And if your problem is, hey, we end up with too much inventory, or we have too many out of stocks in other places, go take on inventory first and start digging into what's there. Find someone you trust. And certainly there's the third-party reporting, ecosystems that have perspectives. But at the end of the day, I used to talk to them and say, who's next on your list? I don't want one that's on your list. I want the next one that's coming. Let me talk to them. But whatever it is that fits you, you have to find somebody that when you're having a conversation with them, you're like, I believe this person, they're speaking my language, and let's have another conversation. And who do you recommend I speak to? Because a lot of this is word of mouth. And again, it gets back to that trust and that culture aspect. I don't think that can be overstated.
Agreed.
Okay. So our next audience question is, when looking to AI to help solve business problems, where does a retailer's data strategy come into play?
Well, we kind of answered that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it has to be in parallel. I don't want to say in sequence, because you don't want to spend a year cleaning up your data and then start looking at things. You have to do these things. In today's world, I think speed is king, and I've always thought speed was king. The omnichannel retailer that can implement new innovations that have impact on their efficiencies or their consumer base fastest are going to win. Just like whoever can design and get a product in their store, if you can do that in 6 months instead of 9 months, you're going to have better revenue than the company that takes 12 months, because you're closer to the customer's needs and wants. And so, to me, you have to work these things in parallel. So I hopefully your company, whether you're internal or external, are using, are focused on that data strategy, and it has to change, because you can't set a data strategy for 3 years and your whole company goes through a metamorphosis. It has to pivot along with your company strategy and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I know it's going to come as a shock, but I agree with everything Jay said. I think, based on a company size, and if anyone who's asking questions here wants to get in contact with us, both of our contact information, I'm sure, will be made available. We can certainly follow up and have more personalized conversations about these particular brands and what their size is and what their problems that they're trying to solve for are. But there are partners that will help you for certain determine what your data strategy should look like. If you're in that situation where you're sort of, scratching your head and saying, I don't really know. Can I trust my consumer data? Can I trust the inventory information that I have? Can I trust the supplier information that I have? There are resources for that. If it's more of a question of, how do I make sure that I have a solid and cohesive data strategy? That's going to come with the experience of actually undertaking everything Jay was just talking about, where you're not operating in isolation. You're just saying, okay, this is my data purity department and they focus on this. But you'll actually know when you start running, real simulated tests of, what if I were to change this variable, what would happen? And then you get to sort of, you sort of play out those simulations as it goes. So if that doesn't help to answer the question, and it might not, if it doesn't, just hit us up and we can take it from there.
For sure.
Okay. So our next audience question is, are there cultural barriers or considerations to optimize meaningful AI adoption?
Oh yeah.
We could talk at the same time and see if people could filter. You go. You go first.
Well, we just wrapped up a project where there was essentially, an internal IT organization that was full of piss and vinegar, and everybody was excited, and then one person, who was worried that this was going to completely, make not only their job obsolete, but also ruin the entire customer experience and a brand that had spent 80 years building, a lot of brand cachet. And by the end of it, I'm sure you'd be surprised to find that person became the biggest cheerleader. There is going to be internal roadblocks in any form of change. There are people who just don't like change, and I think most of those people are people, right? All of us have some sort of fear of the unknown or of change. That doesn't mean it's a reason for inertia or inactivity. It means you just have to find a way to be understanding of that and get those people on board. If they're unwilling after a certain amount of time to come on board, then that's a longer conversation. But there are, in any time that you bring in some sort of, scary science fiction, robot, AI-based future, technology, you're going to have some people that get concerned about it. That is a big part of the problem. And the only real way past it is through it. It takes education, it takes training, it takes, I hate to use the word team building, but it does. Those are key components to a really good culture that you want to foster in your company anyway. So AI shouldn't be the catalyst for, is your team divided or brought together by a technology? Those things should be in place to make sure that your team is operating and humming the way that you want them to anyway, as people who do trust each other and do look out for each other and do work as a cohesive unit rather than at odds with one another. So we've had this conversation so many times, so many different ways. The short answer is AI won't fracture something that's already fractured from a cultural point of view. I mean, it won't fracture something that didn't already have fractures there, but there are ways to deal with that and to actually use this as an opportunity to find fractures that you didn't know existed, and to help to mend them. So from our point of view, yes, I haven't heard of an implementation that didn't have cultural pushback, but there's absolutely 100% a foolproof way to get through that.
Yeah, and I mean, again, some agreement and maybe a complementary spin on it is this is the difference between leadership and management. And I'm a big fan of management too, by the way. I mean, management is hugely important, but this is about leadership and inclusion and including the right people and being open and patient and tolerant. It can be scary. And I think the organizations, retailers, a rising tide lifts all boats. The digital savviness of companies, the data savviness has to rise, not just within the people that already have that as a foundation. And the way you do that is it's perseverance in leadership and inclusion. And eventually you get the naysayers to get on board, the people that are afraid to get on board. And I'm always surprised what you just said. Sometimes the biggest detractor becomes the biggest advocate. And again, we're talking about AI here. This is like in my whole career, this has been the case when you're doing anything in and around something that somebody doesn't understand, technology itself. When email first came into companies, like all of it, it's just about inclusion. You can't be passive aggressive and leave people in the dust. You have to. It doesn't do you any good to be standing in the end zone alone. You need to bring people along with you. In bite-sized chunks and at all levels of the organization, because if the whole organization gets lifted up a notch, you'll have all kinds of self-people that are going up 3 and 4 on their own. But yeah, I put leadership at the center of the culture conversation, but it can be a killer if you don't get it right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we have time for one more audience question, and I think this relates to the previous question, but it's a little different. It focuses on qualitative benefits. Specifically, how can the IT department explain the qualitative benefits of AI to non-tech decision makers, such as the COO and the CFO?
Oh, that's dollars and cents.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go first. You go second. I'll be quick.
Yeah.
Only because we seem to be in that thread of taking turns. I don't really care. The one of the jobs of certainly of a director plus in an IT organization is making what you do understandable across the organization. The CEO at my last company, I worked for Chico's FAS. She was amazingly curious, and I was amazingly curious of what she knew, and so you have to put it in a way that and she was very good at this, not only for herself but for other people. Hey, can you educate the rest of the people on this? It doesn't. You can't be a black box. And when I go back when I first started to be a CIO, everything was a black box inside of technology, and it kind of thrown over the wall and thrown back over the wall. But it's all integrated now, and it behooves everybody to become super smart on this stuff. Just like I think I'm a merchant at heart. I was trained by merchants. Most of my bosses over the last 15 years, I try to see the world through the eyes of the merchant. And even though I'm not one, and the merchants have been very patient with me over my career to help me understand, how they operate and what they do. And I think the technology is part of the business now. They need to do the exact same thing. It needs to be really clear and really understandable, both the capabilities, the financial expectations, and there has to be translators. And it doesn't have to be everybody in the IT department, but this is a lot of times where product management comes into play too, as sort of that bridge between technology and the business. But it gets back to the first question we talked about, culture. It's better to bring everyone along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing about that is unique to the artificial intelligence component of this, and that is historically, you bring on a new technology solution in, say, year one, and it delivers tremendous results to the bottom line, and everyone in the C-suite is happy, the CFO is happy, and then the first thing that they want to do the next year that turns around is, well, what are you going to do now? The beauty of the artificial intelligence component is this doesn't have to be end game as far as benefits that are leveraged from some of these technologies. You can now take what you've learned, tweak it, and the next best action becomes an even smarter next best action. So it has the possibility to learn upon its own travels, and that's really, obviously, for people who are scared of these things, that's scary. For people who are excited about these things, that's exciting. Somewhere in between the two of those is probably the truth, which is that there is a lot that we don't know yet about what these tools are going to be capable of going forward. And for that reason, it's almost imperative that everyone educate themselves as much as they possibly can about how these tools can be leveraged to help your specific business do what it is that your specific business is trying to do today. And that's why we encourage everyone to get as educated as they possibly can about what Jay was talking about earlier, the technology, right? Even people who aren't technologically minded can understand that if something can run a simulation and show them, okay, I'm giving you option A or option B, which one looks better to you? They get that. People can instinctively just say, I like B better. And that helps them be better at their job. And people like being better at their job. So there's an enormous amount. I don't want to sound, again, too repetitive, but there's an enormous amount of nonsense that must be sorted through. But within that nonsense, there's some really powerful, business changing and transformative technologies available. And we encourage everyone to get as educated as they possibly can to help make that distinction for themselves, so that they do make the right decision, so that when they do partner with someone, it is a good technological fit. It is a good cultural fit. And at the end of the day, it helps them operate at least one component of their business much better than they were last week.
That's right. Agreed.
Well, I think that's the perfect way.
I thought we were going to end in a knockdown drag out. I'm a little disappointed.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think agreed is actually a good way to end. So it's now time to wrap up our conversation here. I'd like to thank both the speakers for the insights that you shared today. And if anybody in the audience asked a question we did not have time to answer today, you'll receive a follow-up via email. I'd like to once again thank our speakers, Jay Topper, Chief Customer Officer at Fabric Inc., and Steve Rowan, Managing Partner at Retail Systems Research, for giving us their subject matter expertise today. And also, I'd like to thank Fabric for sponsoring today's webinar. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you, our attendees, for devoting some of your very valuable time to be with us today as well. We hope you found it worthwhile. And thanks again, everybody. Have a great day. We hope to have you all back here again soon.